The Space Shuttle Program. Success or failure? On April 12, 1981, Space Shuttle Columbia launched into orbit in mission STS-1, becoming the first space shuttle to do so. Over 30 years and 4 other orbiters later, Shuttle Atlantis landed in Kennedy Space Center after accomplishing mission STS-135, thereby ending the era of the Space Shuttle program. The Space Shuttle program was an historic undertaking that achieved numerous accomplishments with regards to space utilization, scientific discovery, and international cooperation. However, some still regard it as a failure due to the extremely high cost of maintenance for the orbiters, frustrating design flaws, and engineering stagnation, and the many lives lost in the 2 shuttle disasters. My goals in this video are to explore the history of the Space Shuttle program and to ultimately make a determination as to whether it was a success or a failure. Some of the earliest vehicles that bore resemblance to the modern space shuttle include the X-15 rocket plane as well as the X-20 spaceplane, also known as the Dinosaur. However, the Dinosaur project was ultimately shelved due to the intervention of the space race in the Apollo program of the 1960s, which necessitated the use of a more familiar technology to meet Kennedy's imposed deadline. After Apollo 11, though, President Nixon established a task force to determine NASA's new direction, and it ultimately decided on the development of a space shuttle program. This new direction marked a transition from space exploration to space utilization. NASA hoped for a fleet of shuttles that had maximum practicality, efficiency, cost-effectiveness, and safety. As the most distinctive feature of a shuttle is that it is reusable, these goals seem comfortably attainable. Missions that shuttles were slated to accomplish included deploying and resurfacing space stations, satellites, and telescopes, thereby advancing scientific knowledge in fields such as physics, astronomy, and biology. At the time, these goals were unprecedented. Enterprise was the first orbiter ever built, and it was used in 1977 primarily to test gliding and landing procedures, which had never been used before with a spacecraft. It would be mounted on top of a modified 747, then released from a high altitude to glide back to the surface and land on a runway. Enterprise was never actually launched into orbit. Initially, NASA had hoped to design the space shuttle to be able to be propelled during re-entry, as well as fully reusable, boosters included. But budget constraints prevented these things from coming to be. Columbia was the first orbiter to be launched into orbit in 1981. During its lifetime, it first went through all the flight system tests for the new space shuttle system, then deployed numerous satellites as well as served periodically as a laboratory in space. However, on its 28th mission in early 2003, Columbia broke up during re-entry after its wing had been damaged by falling debris during launch, killing all 7 of its crew. Challenger was the second operational orbiter to be launched. Its missions included the first spacewalk where astronauts utilized jetpacks, as well as the first mission to resurface a satellite already in orbit. On January 28, 1986, Challenger exploded shortly after launch on its 10th mission, killing all 7 of its crew. The explosion was caused by a failed O-ring that had allowed hot gas through to ignite the propellants. Even though the weather was unseasonably cold for Florida, and sensitive components on the shuttle, such as the O-rings, were in danger of freezing, NASA pushed to launch that day anyway. Discovery was the third operational orbiter to be launched, and I have to say that it is my favorite of all the shuttles. It deployed the Hubble Space Telescope, one of the greatest scientific instruments of all time, and this completely changed the way astronomers and physicists viewed the universe. Discovery flew both return-to-flight missions after the Challenger and Columbia disasters, as well as the most total missions of any shuttle. In 1995, only 4 years after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Discovery performed a rendezvous with Russian space station Mir in an unprecedented show of international cooperation in space.
Our first goal is to complete the International Space Station by 2010. The Space Shuttle after nearly 30 years of duty, will be retired from service.
Atlantis was the fourth operational shuttle to be launched. After the Columbia disaster in 2003, President Bush gave a speech declaring that the Space Shuttle program was to be retired in 2010. But until then, its new focus was to complete the International Space Station. Therefore, many of Atlantis' missions included bringing parts to the ISS and slowly assembling it over many years. Atlantis also had the honor to fly the last ever mission of the Space Shuttle program on July 8, 2011. Endeavour was the fifth and last operational shuttle to be launched. It was ordered to be built as a replacement for Challenger. Endeavour brought parts to the International Space Station as well, and it performed the first resurfacing mission for the Hubble Space Telescope, where it installed the CoStar device to correct its original optical flaw. Earlier in this video, I mentioned that some missions the shuttles were slated to accomplish included deploying and resurfacing space stations, satellites, and telescopes, thereby advancing scientific knowledge in fields such as physics, astronomy, and biology. I think it could be said with a fair amount of confidence that the Space Shuttle program did indeed succeed in accomplishing these things. Furthermore, it made strides in unexpected areas. For example, crew makeup began to shift to more accurately reflect the changing times. Women, minorities, people from other countries, and more ordinary people such as scientists and engineers rather than just test pilots became commonplace in shuttle crews. The Space Shuttle program also fostered a new era of international cooperation in space, with the Mir Rendezvous, as well as the construction of the International Space Station. So, the Space Shuttle program did have successes in moving the space program forward. I also mentioned earlier in this video that NASA had hoped for a fleet of shuttles that had maximum practicality, efficiency, cost effectiveness, and safety. I have to say that they failed on all of these fronts. NASA had started out with an ambitious design for the shuttle and subsequently became reliant on it, but the technology was bound to age rapidly. They essentially backed themselves into a corner and were forced to continue to perform costly maintenance on the shuttles between missions. This was necessary because they were flawed from an engineering perspective. Dozens of tiles would routinely fall off, as well as a large piece of insulation in one case, and some shuttle parts were sensitive to extreme temperatures. The latter two of these flaws were the ones responsible for the Columbia and Challenger disasters, respectively. Many would say that the program was not worth the lives of 14 crew members. So, the Space Shuttle program also had significant failures that cannot be ignored. My opinion is that the Space Shuttle program was a success, albeit a highly troubled one. The shuttles were able to accomplish the missions they were tasked to do, and even did much in the way of improving upon society. However, they were an engineering failure, and the way this was handled also exposed some of the more unsavory aspects of NASA. Despite all of this, I am certain that the Space Shuttle program will go down in history as one of the most significant and influential space programs of all time.